Imagine for a moment that you inherit a sealed, iron-bound manuscript. It contains the history of World War II, but the final chapter has been welded shut for 80 years. When you finally crack the seal, you don't find a surrender treaty. You find blueprints for gravity manipulation and launch trajectories aimed at New York.
And these schematics are for a hyper-efficient magnetic levitation transport system, a maglev train. But here's the kicker.
What's the date on them?
The date stamped on the corner is 1944. We are looking at a history that shouldn't exist. This isn't just about better rockets. It's about a breakaway civilization that treated physics like a suggestion, not a law.
But before we unseal this, we want to be clear about who this is for. Here, we don't just tell you what happened. We break down how it works. If you're ready to graduate from the superficial shock factor to really understanding how it all connects to everything else, this is the right place. Subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and let's go deeper.
Exactly. You cannot understand the present if you are ignoring the anomalies of the past. And the anomaly we are discussing today is massive. The history books say Germany lost because they were disorganized. The classified reality is that while they were losing the land war, they were winning the physics war. That brings us to the official narrative we all rely on. It usually goes like this. Germany lost because their so-called Wunderwaffen, their wonder weapons, they were simply too late, too disorganized, and their nuclear program was, well, a benign failure.
That's the story we all know.
Right. But today, guided by these sources we've been given, we're suggesting that this clean narrative is a deliberate, massive cover story. The true scientific race wasn't about who could build the first working V2 rocket. It was about who could successfully secure and then completely suppress the next 3 generations of physics breakthroughs.
And that takes us immediately to the most astonishing claim these sources make. We're looking at a hidden history that claims the U.S. didn't invent the atomic bomb.
No.
They merely found it.
Exactly. That phrase alone, found the bomb, should force anyone to just stop and completely reevaluate their understanding of 1945.
We received this, it's a huge stack of source material detailing what's collectively called the Black Sun paradox. It's this meticulous history of suppressed science, secret projects, nuclear capabilities, and a shadow space race that was apparently running at full tilt while the rest of the world was still figuring out propeller planes. And our mission here is to unpack this gripping, almost unbelievably thrilling narrative. It connects ancient Sanskrit texts, planning nuclear strikes on New York, fundamental manipulation of gravity, and secret Antarctic bases.
It's an incredible story.
It's a story claiming a technological leap that changed the course of post-war science forever, hidden in plain sight. And we are going to connect all those dots for you right now.
So to really understand the technological singularity these sources are claiming, we have to first appreciate the profound philosophical shift that came before it.
Right. It didn't happen in a vacuum.
Not at all. This narrative posits a deliberate abandonment of traditional, rational establishment physics, what the most influential factions within the Third Reich dismissively labeled as Jewish Marxist physics.
It sounds less like a scientific decision and more, almost theological. But we need to be clear, when they rejected rational inquiry, they weren't promoting ignorance or stupidity. They were rejecting reductionism. They believed that standard physics, breaking nature down into tiny dead atoms, was a Jewish materialist trap that killed the spirit of the world.
So what did they replace it with?
They called it Ganzheitslehre, the doctrine of wholeness. They believed that by viewing the world as a unified living organism, they could use intuition to shortcut the scientific method entirely. That's how they justified using pendulums to find battleships or meditation to design rockets. They weren't guessing. They were trying to tap into the whole of nature. They were just convinced that rational inquiry was a dead end.
They believed it was intrinsically limiting. This massive intellectual pivot was driven almost entirely by the occult interests of the SS organization Ahnenerbe.
Yeah, that means ancestral heritage.
It does. And this wasn't some fringe group meeting in a basement. The Ahnenerbe became colossal. It eventually incorporated some 50 fully funded scientific institutes. It was a state-sponsored, highly resourced organization with one explicit goal: to acquire ancient, secret, non-rational knowledge.
So the goal wasn't just to catch up to the Allies with better tanks and planes, but to completely leapfrog them using mystical shortcuts.
Precisely. They funded these extensive, very high-profile expeditions, most famously to Tibet, but also the Near East, even the Andes. They were searching for ancient texts, for relics.
What were they looking for in those texts?
According to the sources, their aim was nothing less than total technological and psychic dominance. Developing high-tech weapons, conducting genetic manipulation to craft a superhuman race, and, crucially, gaining control over human consciousness using what they literally termed magical methods.
So the whole pursuit was inherently non-rational.
Deeply. And this is the absolute core of what the sources call the shaman's logic. The idea that non-rational methods, things like precognition or clairvoyance, could yield faster, superior insights than the slow, systematic approach of laboratory science.
Right. Why spend 10 years on calculus when you could just see the answer?
That's the key. And one of the most critical influences here was a man named Karl Haushofer. He was a genuinely remarkable figure, a decorated German intelligence officer who spent years in India and Japan before the First World War.
And what was he doing there?
He dove deep into Sanskrit, he translated sacred Buddhist texts, and he trained extensively under mystics, including the enigmatic G.I. Gurdjieff and various Tibetan lamas.
Okay.
Critically, Haushofer became proficient in clairvoyance or precognition. He even visited Tibet and Mongolia as early as 1904 specifically for this kind of esoteric training.
And we're talking about abilities that had actual military applications, which is what got him noticed.
Absolutely. While he was serving as a general in 1914, Haushofer became known for this uncanny ability to predict specific battlefield events.
For example, the precise timing of an enemy attack, or even where artillery shells were going to land. This ability, this shamanic precognition, caught the attention of Adolf Hitler.
And Haushofer became his mentor.
He did. He introduced Hitler to concepts like Lebensraum or living space and all these occult mystical theories from the Thule Society circles.
The sources make a pretty chilling connection here, linking this acceptance of the non-rational to that infamous Munich beer hall assassination attempt on Hitler in 1939.
Yes, the narrative focuses on this concept of the 12-minute urge. On November 8, 1939, after delivering a speech, Hitler suddenly left the building 12 minutes earlier than he'd planned.
Why?
He cited this unexplained, almost frantic urge to get back to Berlin because of fog. An excuse, really. 12 minutes later, a bomb planted by Georg Elser detonated, completely obliterating the very spot where Hitler had been standing.
Wow.
The sources suggest this wasn't just luck, it was the active manifestation of Haushofer's influence and the belief in using precognition to guide your strategy. So Hitler's famous anti-intellectualism wasn't just ignorance, it was a deeper embrace of this non-rational method, believing it offered a strategic advantage over the rational, materialist world of his enemies.
Precisely. He famously stated, "We are enemies of reason," but he meant it in a profound philosophical sense. And this path led them to embrace some truly bizarre theories, like glacial cosmogony.
Glacial cosmogony by Hans Herberger. Okay, give us the ELI 5 on this, because it sounds like a physics fever dream.
It pretty much is. The world ice doctrine. It was wildly controversial, even within Germany, but the SS promoted it heavily.
So what's the theory?
Herberger's theory posited that colossal cosmic ice structures collided with a supersun, which threw huge fragments ice, not rock far out into space. These icy fragments then coalesced into the planets.
So the whole universe in this model is driven by ice, fire, and catastrophic cosmic collisions.
Basically, yes.
And why was this relevant to building rockets or weapons?
Because it served as the intellectual sledgehammer, they needed to entirely dismiss orthodox astronomy and physics, which they viewed as contaminated and, fundamentally flawed.
So by embracing this alternative mystical cosmogony, they could justify searching for entirely new scientific pathways.
That's it. The sources suggest this search hinted at concepts that sound a lot like what we'd now call quantum consciousness, the belief that fundamental knowledge is accessible through non-local, non-rational means, a radical, almost shamanic view of accessing information about the very structure of reality.
They were convinced that by looking outside the rational, they would unlock impossible technology.
And that philosophical leap, rejecting rational physics for the mystical, it quickly translated into concrete military projects.
Right. Now we move from ancient texts to the nuts and bolts of air warfare. The German strategy, realizing they just couldn't match Allied air production, shifted towards subtle, non-technical area denial defenses.
When you're facing overwhelming air superiority, your best defense isn't a bigger gun. It's a silent killer that can disable thousands of planes at once. And this is where SS General Hans Kammler's oversight of these secret weapons programs becomes essential.
Kammler. He's the key figure managing all this.
He is. His ability to manage and conceal these projects led to devastatingly simple weapons disguised by massive cover stories.
Okay, let's start with the one that sounds the most ridiculous on the surface. The Vortex Cannon, linked to a Dr. Zippermeyer.
Zippermeyer was a key figure, but he was primarily focused on massive explosives, specifically coal dust bombs. His project was codenamed Hexenkessel, which means witch's cauldron.
So what was the Vortex Cannon then?
The Vortex Cannon was the cover story, and it was brilliantly effective. It was presented as this massive, ground-installed pipe that would ignite a coal dust vapor cloud in a vortex, theoretically sweeping Allied planes from the sky using just shockwaves.
It sounds impressive, but totally impractical, like something out of a comic book.
Exactly, which made it the perfect piece of misdirection. It allowed the real project to continue in absolute secrecy.
And the real project was the coal dust itself.
The sources are clear. The real technology was a cheap, highly destructive fuel-air explosive intended for city destruction, carried by rockets or aircraft. The coal dust vapor, when ignited slowly over a wide area, created an explosion that, based on their mathematical dispersion models, rivaled the projected destruction radius of an early atomic bomb.
It was a poor man's nuke.
It was, and it was operationally ready long before the U.S. understood the concept of fuel-air explosives.
The fact they had a mathematician dedicated to verifying the dispersion characteristics that shows a meticulous level of planning for a weapon that was supposed to be a joke.
It highlights the extreme compartmentalization and the success of the cover story. But beyond explosives, they pursued something even more subtle: weaponized engine failure, a non-contact defense against massive bomber formations.
This brings us to the famous Kugelblitz flying disc and this concept of icing gas.
Right. Renato Guesco, who was an Italian aviation expert reporting on German projects, he described the Kugelblitz defense. The flying disc would shoot a specialized gas mixture ahead of the bomber formations using high-pressure blowers.
And how did this azote cocktail, as one source calls it, work? How do you freeze the sky?
It was an ingenious form of sabotage. The gas mixture, often hinted at being weaponized liquid nitrogen or other super-cold, fuel-altering agents, was designed to be inhaled by the enemy engines.
And once it gets in the engine,
When it mixed with the atmospheric oxygen and the fuel inside the combustion chamber, the gas dramatically lowered the fuel's effective octane rating.
which causes the engine to knock or ping, like putting cheap gas in a high-performance car.
Precisely. It causes destructive pre-ignition, completely disrupting the engine's timing. If the effect was pervasive enough across a bomber formation, it would render the engines completely inefficient. You'd get a total loss of power or catastrophic engine failure.
It's a non-lethal, non-traceable way to bring down an entire bomber formation. It would just look like mechanical failure across the board.
Exactly. The claim is they could use these compounds to rapidly create, get this, 2 inches of solid ice on engine intakes at altitude. It's high-altitude engine failure on demand.
That's terrifyingly subtle. And this ties into the motor stop middle, the electromagnetic version of engine sabotage, right?
Yes, the concepts ran in parallel. The motor stop middle, or engine stop device, was reportedly a magnetic wave or ray. It was developed by Dr. Hans Friedrich Gold and others, and it was intended to neutralize Allied aircraft motors via electromagnetic disturbances, Project 1217.
So not a death ray that blows things up.
No, not at all. It was a specialized electromagnetic pulse designed simply to kill the ignition or the sensitive electrical systems. Allied intelligence took this threat so seriously that the U.S. actually launched an investigation into the possibility of Germany using these rays to neutralize their aircraft.
So on one hand, you have a literal witch's cauldron explosive disguised as a ridiculous cannon. And on the other, you have these silent, invisible methods for freezing enemy engines or frying their electrical systems.
It demonstrates a truly radical shift in military thought, a shift driven by that initial rejection of traditional physics.
We've established that the initial occult-driven abandonment of traditional rational physics and the subsequent focus on subtle, unconventional warfare weren't mere distractions.
No, they were the crucial foundational steps.
Right. They showed a willingness to think completely outside the material box. I mean, if you're willing to believe in shamanic precognition and harness cosmic ice, why would you stop at gas warfare?
The crucial point is the sheer scale of the vision. When you pursue occult science, you are looking for massive existential leaps, not small incremental improvements.
And the projects we've discussed so far, the Hexenkessel cover story, the engine-killing gas, they were just paving the way for the ultimate leap.
Conquering space and bending physics itself.
And if these sources are accurate, the Germans weren't planning for the surrender of 1945. They were actively building for a future that looked like 1965 or even later.
We're moving from disrupting local air traffic to global, intercontinental, and orbital domination.
Get ready, because we're about to talk about the New York destruction threat and the man who allegedly reached the edge of space 80 years ago.
The story of the A9A10 is the ultimate paradox of suppressed science. Conventional history dismisses the America rocket as just an uncompleted blueprint, a fantasy that came too late.
But our sources,
Yeah.
they tell a very different story. The reality was much, much further advanced.
Much further.
So how far did the construction actually get? Give us the hardware truth.
The evidence cited by the sources is concrete. Otto Skorzeny, the SS specialist who ran numerous secret operations, he claimed that the A9-A10 combination was practically finished by late March 1945. He stated it was only 1 month from serial production.
A month.
1 month. And Wernher von Braun, the rocketry genius, he allegedly confirmed to the journalist Luigi Ramersa that the A-10 booster stage was actually built. This wasn't a blueprint.
But the most damning piece of historical evidence has to be General Arnold's report from November 1945.
It is. General Arnold, leading the U.S. Army Air Forces, formally referred to atomic long-range rockets as present equipment already available to the U.S. military.
Present equipment. That phrasing is,
Yeah.
It's not ambiguous.
Not at all. Present equipment is an undeniable indication that these intercontinental ballistic missile, these ICBM systems, were either operational when the war ended, or they were captured in a state of near readiness.
So let's visualize this thing. How big was the hardware that was allegedly built?
This thing was a monster. The A-10 booster stage alone was gigantic. 4.15 meters in diameter, that's almost 14 feet, and 20 meters long.
So like a 6-story building.
Pretty much. It weighed 87 metric tons and carried a staggering 62 tons of fuel. The engines were designed to burn for just 50 seconds, accelerating the combined unit to 4,320 kilometers per hour. That's hypersonic speed.
And then the A9 second stage would ignite and carry the payload the rest of the way.
Exactly. And this rocket, often terrifyingly nicknamed Thor's Hammer, was clearly aimed at the U.S.
The New York destruction threat was real.
Absolutely. With an intercontinental range of 5,000 to 5,500 kilometers, major U.S. cities, and specifically the financial and population center of New York, were well within range.
And the launch planning shows the intent. I mean, the guidance system was highly advanced. Autonomous astronavigation, operational by 1944-45.
Which is key. That system allowed the rocket to perform course corrections over vast ocean distances without needing vulnerable ground radio signals. It was a fire-and-forget ICBM.
So how precise was the targeting meant to be?
Highly precise, which indicates a planned strike, not just a desperate fling across the Atlantic. The sources mention Operation Elster.
Oh, was that?
German agents were installing small, shortwave transmitters on New York skyscrapers, presumably to act as homing beacons to guide the incoming rockets during their final descent.
Wow. And there's a connection to that mysterious U-boat sinking near New York.
The strange positioning and sinking of U-869 right off the coast of New Jersey is cited as circumstantial evidence. It suggests it may have been involved in a complex guidance or observation role related to this A9-A10 operation. Mainstream historians still struggle to definitively explain why it was there.
This is all incredible, but now we get to the detail that truly challenges the timeline of human achievement. The screaming astronaut.
This is the alleged proof that the technology wasn't just built, it was successfully flown. The sources refer to a purported manned A9-A10 flight in January of 1945.
A manned flight into space in 1945.
The pilot was either Rudolf Magnus Schroeder or, more likely, a Dr. Kettner. The mission, according to this narrative, reached the edge of space, making him the first man in space by a full 16 years over Yuri Gagarin.
That is a staggering claim.
He achieved spaceflight, but he didn't return as a hero.
What happened to him?
That's the mind-blowing and horrific part. A radio transmission was intercepted near the Baltic coast. Operators heard this first astronaut screaming into his microphone, "She will burn! My Führer! I am dying!"
Whoa. Was the rocket failing?
There are two theories in the sources. One is that the thermal insulation on the A9 failed during re-entry or high-speed ascent, causing him to literally incinerate inside the capsule. The other is that he suffered a total mental breakdown from the extreme G-forces and the isolation of the vacuum. The rocket eventually deviated from its course and crashed into the Atlantic, never reaching its target. And our sources say that Allied intelligence largely hid or destroyed these files to prevent the public from knowing just how terrifyingly advanced the Reich's non-technological path had become while scrambling to secure the blueprints for themselves.
Is there any evidence at all that connects this supposed pilot to later verifiable history?
Absolutely. This is where the story gets really compelling. Dr. Kettner later came to the U.S. under Project Paperclip. He was heavily integrated into NASA, becoming the chief authority on manned aspects of spaceflight for the Mercury and Apollo programs.
So the guy who put Americans in space.
He was a central figure, and crucially, in a 1961 NASA memo about the Mercury Redstone program, Kettner explicitly referenced prior experience with re-entry accelerations. He stressed the importance of keeping them under 12 Gs.
Which implies?
According to the sources, it strongly implies that this experience came from an actual successful A9-A10 test flight. He knew exactly what the human body could handle during a suborbital reentry because he had some level of previous experience with it. His memo, in effect, is the silent historical confirmation of that January 1945 spaceflight.
The flight where the astronaut must have been screaming under that immense G-load.
The A9-A10 represents the pinnacle of traditional, if massively scaled up, rocketry.
And we have to look forward, because Peenemunde's long-term plans went so far beyond just hitting New York. The scale is staggering.
What came after the A-10?
They projected the three-stage A-12 rocket, and its specific purpose was to carry a component of a permanent orbital station.
In the mid-1940s, that's a space station.
It's a space station, and beyond that was the truly mind-bending A-14, a five-stage monster, planned to orbit the moon with 3 astronauts, and this mission would rely on the Sanger principle for the return journey.
Okay, for the layperson, break that down for us. What is that?
It's a technique called atmospheric skip gliding. Think of skipping a flat stone across a pond.
Okay, I can picture that.
The A-14 re-entry vehicle, upon hitting the upper atmosphere, wouldn't just plunge through it. It would skip off the top layer multiple times to bleed off speed and thermal energy. It would act like a winged glider,
allowing the astronauts to land safely instead of burning up.
Exactly. This incredibly sophisticated principle of aerospace dynamics was being designed for a manned lunar mission in 1945. It forces you to ask if the moon race of the 60s wasn't a race at all, but was potentially delayed by 2 decades through the suppression of this knowledge.
This is a crucial dot connection, isn't it? The ambition wasn't just military anymore, it was interplanetary. But the true radical leap, the one that brought the occult science full circle, was the development of disc-shaped craft, managed by the top-secret Sonderbüro 13.
Okay, so now we are moving from rockets aimed at New York to actual flying saucers. And this is where the ancient texts come back into play.
They do. The narrative states that German intelligence agents were actively involved in buying up ancient Indian treatises on flight technology. The genesis of the famous German flying disc projects, the Haunebu and Kugelblitz, is explicitly linked to the reverse engineering of ancient Sanskrit manuscripts, specifically the Vimana Shastra.
The Vimana Shastra, what exactly is that?
It's a classic Sanskrit text. It details descriptions of the Vimana, which translates roughly to divine chariots or flying machines.
So, myths.
Well, the sources claim these were not myths, but functional flight manuals, covering the construction, the materials, the operation of advanced aircraft powered by principles entirely foreign to 20th century physics.
Is there any corroboration for this?
The sources mention that Dr. Haynes of NASA was later reportedly intensely keen on recovering these specific texts, which suggests they contained genuinely valuable technological data.
So the logic was, if the ancients wrote about anti-gravity ships, we need to stop messing with wings and reverse engineer their physics.
That was the core tenet of the Ahnenerbe's involvement in technology. The sources state that intense work was undertaken on disc-shaped aircraft using non-traditional lift principles.
How did they keep it secret?
Radical compartmentalization. To maintain extreme secrecy, parts for the craft were manufactured across various unconnected plants. No single factory, no single engineer knew the purpose of the final assembly. Only Kammler knew the whole blueprint.
And prototypes flew. This wasn't just on paper.
Yes. Projects like the Balonzo discs, Zimmermann's flying pancake, which was reportedly unstable but hit a staggering 700-kilometer air taker, and Schriever's flying discs were all tested.
Were there witnesses?
Eyewitness accounts, according to the sources, reported test flights of metallic discs, often flying low to the ground, sometimes bearing the swastika. This confirmed the disc-shaped craft blueprints were translated into operational hardware.
We have documented designs that show this.
Like what?
Well, A man named Rudolf Schriever claimed to be the creator of several German flying discs. There was also the flying pancake,
You gotta love the name.
designed by a man named Zimmermann in 1942. And this vehicle apparently achieved over 700 kilometers per hour.
That is a blistering speed for 1942.
But it was shelved because it was just too unstable to control.
And what about the objects that were actually observed in the sky, the Foo Fighters?
For that, we have to mention the Bolonzo discs. This was an Italo-German project, also from 1942.
And these discs are claimed to be the actual basis for some of those glowing UFOs that Allied pilots were reporting?
The key here is that, according to this narrative, these weren't energy-based phantoms. They were physical prototypes, utilizing radical vortex-based propulsion systems.
And this is the crucial point, isn't it? This is where the suppressed narrative connects directly to the post-war UFO phenomenon.
It's the linchpin. The source material claims that CIA archives, which were partially declassified in the 1950s, indicated that the majority of post-war UFO sightings, that famous flying saucer wave, were actually recovered or further developed German prototypes.
So they were terrestrial, suppressed secrets, simply masked as an extraterrestrial mystery to hide the huge technological jump the victors had acquired.
So what was the revolutionary physical principle behind these, if not wings and jet engines?
The principles revolved around alternative propulsion. They were looking at things like inertia drives, photonic accelerators, and, most importantly, vortex engines.
Vortex engines, what does that mean?
The deep dive sources connect this to the highest levels of modern physics. They point out that NASA research into black holes actually confirms that their rotation, a massive gravitational vortex, produces immense power output. It essentially functions as the universe's most powerful electric motor.
Hold on. Are you saying they claimed German engineers in the 1940s were trying to miniaturize the physics of a spinning black hole?
That is the direct implication. They were using the concept of gravity manipulation through vortex dynamics. By utilizing high-speed rotation and powerful electromagnetic fields, the German designs aimed to tap into or generate a local vortex, which would theoretically create lift and propulsion by interacting with the fabric of space itself.
That's the ultimate example of the occult shift influencing technology. Looking at the cosmos, understanding its spinning mechanisms, and trying to replicate that power source in a vehicle.
And if tapping cosmic vortex energy for a flying saucer wasn't ambitious enough, their long-term vision was literally galactic.
The German space program wasn't planning for the end of the war. They were planning for long-term, multi-decade domination. The sources claim their timeline had a 1995 deadline for achieving certain goals.
The scope of the German space program, heavily influenced by their ICBM successes, was staggering. It confirms they were aiming for orbital superiority and deep space exploration decades before Sputnik or Apollo. Hitler's space revolution was aimed at long-term domination, and the plans extended far beyond simple rockets.
Which brings us to the most outlandish and frankly cinematic concept of them all, the sun mirror.
The Sonnenspiegel was a terrifyingly ambitious concept for a vast orbital space station designed by German rocket scientists. Their calculations, performed during the war, determined this mirror would need to be 3 square kilometers in area. That's over a square mile wide.
A mile-wide mirror in space.
Yeah.
The purpose of this colossal orbital station.
It would function as a light flash weapon. It would concentrate solar energy into a massive focus beam capable of devastating targets on Earth.
Like a giant magnifying glass from orbit.
Exactly. And chillingly, it was also theorized it could be used to heat up and actually boil the oceans in targeted areas, vaporizing entire ports and coastal regions. This earned it the ominous nickname, Flying Artillery Hitler.
Boiling the ocean from space. That sounds like a 22nd century project. Did they have the launch capacity to even dream of putting something that big into orbit?
They were designing the vehicles for it. Peenemünde designed massive multi-stage rockets specifically for this kind of heavy lift. The A-12, which would have generated a phenomenal 12,800 tons of thrust. And the A-14.
What was the A-14 for?
The A-14 was designed as a 5-stage behemoth intended for a manned moon flyby with 3 astronauts. This confirms the German program was already aiming for deep space, a manned lunar mission decades ahead of schedule.
They weren't just thinking about it, they were engineering it. And they had calculated where to put a permanent base, too.
Yes. Calculations by an SS Sturmbannführer named Rudolf Engel determined that a permanent orbital space base could be built at an altitude of 5,100 miles, a point where Earth's gravitational pull approaches 0. This laid the detailed groundwork for future space station proposals.
The sheer scale of this vision, a 3-square-kilometer space station, moon missions, orbital weapons, it just confirms that the German program was operating with a timeline that stretched well into the late 20th century.
They weren't fighting to win the war in 1945. They were building to dominate the world in 1995.
Okay, that is the perfect spot to just pause and reflect on the utter magnitude of these claims. We've established the philosophical and technical roots of this paradox. We've gone from occult wisdom guiding artillery forecasts to a supersonic astronaut achieving orbit in 1945 and plans to boil the ocean using flying artillery Hitler.
It's a lot to take in.
If you're anything like us, your historical view of the war is currently being completely rewritten. What you're hearing today is the deep dive into history that they didn't want you to know about, full of concepts that have been systematically kept out of the public eye. We are now moving from these massive global domination schemes into the most critical part of the puzzle, the source of limitless power and the reality of the German nuclear arsenal. Don't go anywhere.
This is where it gets very real.
But first, if this mind-blowing content is hitting the spot, if it's making you rethink everything, do us a huge favor. Hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps us keep digging into these paradoxes. And definitely check out our memberships. That is where we go even deeper into topics like these. Trust us, you absolutely need to stick around for the zero-point energy and tactical nuclear revelations.
So the massive scale of the German rocket and space programs we just discussed, the 87-ton A-10, the A-14 moon rocket, the orbital mirror, all of it, demanded a solution to the fuel problem.
Right. Chemical propellants, even the most advanced ones, they just can't sustain that kind of orbital and intercontinental ambition. It's just a physics problem.
Exactly. And this is what drove the desperate yet allegedly successful pursuit of free energy, or what we now know as zero-point energy.
To the mainstream scientific world, free energy sounds like total fantasy. It's a physics impossibility, a violation of thermodynamics. But the sources claim they had working prototypes that generated significant power.
They certainly did, according to this narrative. And a key figure here was a physicist named Dr. Ronald Richter.
Richter was a Czech physicist working in some very advanced research facilities, but his ZPE breakthrough wasn't planned. It was accidental, discovered while he was analyzing plasma compression ratios.
Okay, can you give us the ELI-5 mechanism of what he found? How on earth do you get energy from empty space?
So, the theory is that empty space isn't actually empty. It's full of fluctuating energy virtual particles popping in and out of existence all the time.
Okay, a sea of energy.
Right. And Richter was compressing electron gas to an optimal degree. During this compression, he observed these peculiar exchange signals.
What did they look like?
They were characterized by extremely large amplitudes and very small pulse width. And he theorized that this highly compressed electron gas effectively becomes an electromagnetic vampire energy cage.
A vampire cage? That sounds like something straight out of a thriller novel.
It's a highly dramatic name, but the concept is actually pretty straightforward. The compressed electron gas acts as a detector or a trap that draws this energy out of the vacuum of space.
How so?
The electrons in the gas are so dense, they effectively force the zero-point energy, which they call Brahm energy or energy of space, to become real and enter the circuit.
You're essentially extracting life-sucking electricity from the void itself.
That's the analogy, yes. And Richter wasn't the only one exploring this raw energy.
We have to look at the work of Hans Kammler, a German energy researcher. He developed two key devices, the Stromerzeuger, current generator, and the Magnetstromapparat, magnetic current apparatus.
And these things worked.
These devices reportedly generated significant power, up to 6 kilovolts in Kammler's basic unit, using what the sources call Raum energy, the energy of space.
Can you explain simply how these devices supposedly harvested energy from the void? I mean, how does that work?
The devices were essentially highly specialized circuits. They used permanent magnets, coils, copper plates, and capacitors. The copper plates, when activated, were described by the researchers as acting like an open drain plug, allowing ambient space energy to just flow into the circuit.
So it's based on the premise that the physical vacuum of space is not empty, but it's teeming with potential energy.
Correct.
It's striking that Kohler and Dr. Hans Friedrich Gold, the guy from the engine stop ray, and Dr. Ronald Richter, they all independently landed on this concept of extracting energy from the surrounding space or vacuum.
That convergence in the narrative strongly suggests a coordinated effort to find a physics breakthrough. And the theoretical leap was reportedly achieved by Dr. Ronald Richter.
What was his background?
He was initially neck-deep in nuclear fusion research. specifically working on shockwave-ignited fusion reactors that consumed cheap, common elements like lithium and boron.
So he was trying to solve the energy problem with fusion, and he just stumbled onto something much, much bigger.
That's the story. The sources claim Richter proved that the highly compressed plasma in his device acted as a resonant cavity, allowing energy to be drawn from those quantum vibrations of the vacuum itself.
The ultimate implication of this is just terrifying. If you have 0-point energy, you don't need fuel. Ever. For anything.
Correct. The vast potential of ZPE would solve the fuel problem for every ambitious project they had. The A-14 moon rocket, the disc-shaped craft, nuclear aircraft, you name it.
The sources describe the implication of this limitless energy as the electromagnetic vampire energy cage, or life-sucking electricity.
It's technology that fundamentally bypasses traditional fuel sources by harnessing the energy of the void. It solves the long-range problem entirely and immediately. They had the propulsion, and now, according to this, they had the power source.
We've established the German scientific ambition stretched to space colonization and tapping into the cosmos' energy. That's the stuff of science fiction. But let's ground ourselves now in the hard, terrifying reality of the war.
Right.
If these sources are correct, the most immediate and decisive breakthrough wasn't hypothetical, it was operational. Nuclear weaponry. This is the ultimate climax of the Black Sun paradox.
We need to put aside the polite academic history of the Manhattan Project. We are going to discuss direct, eyewitness evidence of German atomic tests in 1944. We're going to examine the hard questions about where the U.S. truly acquired the bombs dropped on Japan.
And reveal the evidence that the Nazis were planning a radiological attack on New York using dirty bombs launched from U-boats. Stay tuned for the Thuringian Flash.
Let's start with the central lie of the official history, the farm hall transcripts.
Right. The standard narrative is that the top German scientists, including Werner Heisenberg, were genuinely surprised when they heard about Hiroshima on the radio. That's supposed to be the proof they were years behind.
The sources strongly assert that the farm hall denials were a coordinated theater piece, a strategic deception agreed upon by the captured German physicists.
Why?
They were terrified of being labeled war criminals for working on an atomic bomb, so they signed a memorandum claiming they were only working on a benign uranium machine for energy. It was designed to hide the actual extent of their nuclear work.
And the actual extent was massive, not some slow, small-scale reactor program.
It was vast. Contrary to the official history, the Germans were leading in enriching weapons-grade uranium and plutonium.
The sources point to the discovery of 1,130 tons of raw uranium found at just one location, Stassfurt.
And that's not including massive other processed stocks. They had the raw goods.
And they had the technological capability to enrich it. By mid-1942, Germany had 5 to 7 different isotope separation programs running simultaneously.
That's the real technical bottleneck for building a uranium bomb.
Exactly. They had ultracentrifuges, advanced electromagnetic separators. How did their separation efforts compare to the U.S. program at Oak Ridge?
The sources claim they were not only comparable, but were potentially ahead in efficiency. Von Ardenn's electromagnetic separator was structurally similar to the calotrons the U.S. later used. It proves they had the means to create weapons-grade material.
And they weren't just making one type of bomb.
No. They were working on multiple types of nuclear and radiological devices, ranging from small, transportable, pineapple-sized tactical weapons up to monstrous 30-ton devices.
And crucially, post-war investigations of Baron von Ardenn's facility near Berlin found traces of enriched uranium in the concrete, 1.3 meters deep,
proving that the isotope separation apparatus had been fully operational for some time.
And the timeline of discovery also seems to have been suppressed. An Austrian physicist, Jacob Schintelmeister, allegedly isolated Transuran 104, now officially called dubnium during the war.
An element that was only officially discovered decades later in the 1960s.
Which points to these immense, suppressed advances in nuclear material science that would have been absolutely essential for understanding weaponizable components. Which brings us to the physical evidence that these weapons were operational in 1944. The eyewitness account of the Italian journalist Luigi Romersa.
This is one of the most compelling parts of the narrative. Romersa, who was observing for Mussolini, traveled to the Bug Peninsula near Rugen Island. On October 12, 1944, he claims he witnessed a ground-based atomic bomb detonation.
He was there?
He was. He was kilometers away, watching the blast through a smoked glass window in a concrete bunker.
What did he see?
He reported a sudden, powerful white flash, followed by a dark cloud and an immense blast wave that physically struck the bunker. Crucially, the sources cite his estimate of a 1.5-kilometer destruction radius,
which places the detonation squarely within the range of an early, lower-yield atomic device, like a rudimentary plutonium bomb or a powerful dirty bomb.
Exactly. And modern science seems to support this claim.
How so?
Sources cite post-war measurements at the test site that show evidence of glassification and fusion processes requiring extreme nuclear-level heat, along with elevated levels of alpha and beta radiation and cesium-137. This confirms a high-yield explosion occurred there, despite Allied attempts to cover it up and grade the site afterwards.
So Ferugen was a coastal test site. The secret inland factory was Object Berg, which links to the legendary Thuringian Flash.
That's right. Object Berg was a massive, secret underground atomic factory located in the Ohrdruf military training ground in Thuringia. This is the site linked to reports of a powerful, mysterious light flash in early March 1945, the Ohrdruf powerful light flash.
And this place was a priority.
Unlimited funds were approved for this facility. It employed vast numbers of prisoners. And horrifically, sources note that these prisoners had spent weeks washing down contaminated tunnels after successful tests just to make them safe for the scientists to re-enter.
And those scientists weren't just German.
No. Crucial intelligence suggested the presence of Japanese scientists at Ohrdruf. This confirms a vital wartime exchange of nuclear knowledge between Germany and Japan, a fact that is largely absent from official Western histories.
So the next logical question is, why didn't the Germans use the atomic weapons that, according to these sources, had been developed and tested already?
It wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of strategic fear and internal betrayal. First, there was this massive existential dread. The sources say that the leadership received a report from a high scientific authority warning that a nuclear explosion might trigger a self-sustaining chain reaction in the atmosphere, literally turning the Earth into an artificial sun and ending all life. And even if that didn't take place, the leadership was convinced that using a nuclear weapon would provoke the Allies to respond with their own biological and chemical arsenals, specifically anthrax or nerve gas. They knew they didn't have the defenses to protect their own people from that kind of counterstrike, so they held back.
And we can't forget the Canaris factor.
The suppressed narrative points to deliberate sabotage. Admiral Canaris and his intelligence circle were supposedly stalling the program from the very start in 1939 to ensure the weapon was never finished. Even in April 1945, critical detonators for these weapons were being lost, or the planes carrying them were being sabotaged.
The failure to use the bomb was like a dead man's switch on a failing engine. The driver, the leadership, was too terrified that hitting the button would blow up the whole car. The mechanics, the scientists and intelligence, were intentionally cutting the wires. And the passengers, top officials, were trying to sell the car's blueprints to the police to avoid being arrested before the car finally hit the wall.
Perfect analogy.
This all culminates in the truly existential question, the American arsenal question. If the Germans had operational weapons, where did the U.S. get the bombs they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
The sources cite two starting points for this. First, the leading U.S. atomic researcher, Harry Oppenheimer, allegedly stated that the bombs dropped on Japan came from German arsenals.
That's a direct quote.
An alleged one, yes. And second, President Truman's unusual public phrasing following the Hiroshima attack is noted. Having found the bomb, we have used it. The use of the word found, rather than invented or developed, is suspicious, if the U.S. had truly pioneered the weapon from scratch.
So what was the mechanism for the transfer? How did they find it?
Significant components of the little boy uranium bomb, including highly enriched uranium oxide or even U-235 components, may have fallen into U.S. hands via the surrendered U-234 submarine.
The U-boat that was on its way to Japan.
Exactly. It was intercepted with a critical cargo load. The U.S. may have simply acquired the warhead components or entire designs, allowing them to rapidly assemble the final weapons.
Which makes the German delivery systems suddenly terrifyingly real. Specifically, the nuclear V-1s.
They were ready to deliver. They had plans for submarine-launched nuclear V-1s, the Phi-103, which would be carried by specialized hyperforeign U-boats. SS leader Himmler was desperately pushing for this project in late 1944, and it is argued these were intended to carry nuclear warheads.
And this technology didn't just disappear.
Not at all. This design led directly to the U.S. Navy's post-war Loon missile. It was another direct technological transfer.
And even more insidious than the V-1s were the dirty bombs.
The Ursel project.
Yeah.
It involved small underwater rockets carrying small 15-kilogram warheads launched from U-boats, potentially from Toplitzy.
And these carried small radiological bombs. Dirty bombs coupled with conventional detonators.
That's the argument. They weren't designed for an immense blast, but simply to scatter radioactive isotopes over targets like New York or San Francisco.
Why only a 15-kilogram payload?
It wouldn't have been sufficient for a conventional blast to destroy a major city, but it was perfect for a radiological contamination attack, an economical, technically feasible alternative to the massive A9-A10 program.
And there was evidence of this planned attack.
The sources mention that among the secret documents recovered, U-boat captains carried Dachau nautical charts. These charts showed specific launch positions off the coast of New York and San Francisco, suggesting the Ursel dirty bomb attack was imminent. The concept birthed the great-grandmothers of the American and Russian underwater atomic rockets that define nuclear deterrence today.
So the final piece of this sprawling narrative connects all the advanced technology we've discussed. ICBMs, zero-point energy, operational nukes, with a strategy of strategic retreat and geographic secrecy.
Exactly. The narrative culminates in the belief that the most important technological assets and the personnel who understood them were not surrendered. They were successfully evacuated to a pre-prepared, highly protected location.
Antarctica, the ultimate secret base. And the philosophical guide for this escape is almost as strange as the technology itself. Glacial cosmogony provided the perfect ideological foundation for looking toward the poles, the realm of ice, as a source of hidden power, and, more importantly, a potential safe haven.
The sources even mention a truly bizarre claim of a telepathic giant mutation tied to this ice doctrine.
Whoa! Unpack that for us.
The theory suggested that humanity had already passed through cycles of golden ages, ruled by 10-foot-tall telepathic giants, mutated by the opposing gravity of a previous falling moon. The Nazis believed the Aryan race was the direct descendant of these godlike beings who had survived previous cosmic catastrophes by retreating into the hollow earth or high mountain strongholds. As our current moon, the fourth to orbit Earth, spiraled inward, its proximity would decrease gravity, triggering a biological mutation that would restore the Germans to their original giant stature and unlock forgotten knowledge. By residing in these geothermal voids in Antarctica, they were positioning themselves to survive the coming New Age transition and the eventual fall of the moon. It just illustrates how deeply detached from conventional science their core beliefs had become.
And it provided the ultimate justification for their legendary destination, the Antarctic Fortress, Base 211.
The narrative of secret German expeditions to Antarctica, starting with Operation New Swabia or Neuschwabenland in 1938 and 39, is well documented.
But the deep dive here is into the purpose of that expedition. Admiral Dunitz made a very cryptic quote in 1943. He said the submarine fleet had created an impregnable fortress for the Fuhrer at the other end of the world.
An impregnable fortress, a frozen gate. What evidence suggests this wasn't just a fantasy?
There are reports suggesting German cargo submarines, some of which disappeared without a trace in the South Atlantic, were transporting massive amounts of heavy equipment.
Specifically, things you'd need to build a base.
Tunnel boring equipment, specialized rail lines, and all the materials needed for long-term subterranean habitation.
And the stories from the submariners themselves are key here, aren't they?
Yes. Submariners allegedly reported finding an entire system of connected caves and warm underground geothermal air pockets in the ice. They described it as a true earthly paradise.
Perfectly shielded, undetectable by air, and capable of housing advanced research operations. This would be the impenetrable cache for Kammler's most sensitive technology.
The sources claim that over 1,500 secret charts pertaining to the navigation and geography of these hidden regions were either captured or lost at the end of the war.
And the post-war activity surrounding this location is incredibly mysterious.
The U.S. Antarctic Expedition of 1947, Operation High Jump, led by Admiral Byrd. It was supposed to last for months, but it was abruptly curtailed after only 3 weeks.
And it was surrounded by what the sources describe as an aura of mystery. They allegedly suffered unexpected losses and returned home prematurely.
Which suggests they encountered something organized, unexpected, or highly resistant down there.
The ultimate vanishing act, though, has to be the man who held all the keys. SS Obergruppenführer Dr. Hans Kammler.
He oversaw every single one of these hyper-advanced projects, from ZPE to the Sun Mirror, yet his official fate is a mess of contradictions. Claimed suicide, claimed execution, claimed escape.
His disappearance is absolutely central to the entire suppression narrative. It implies he successfully transferred the entire technological core to safety before the end.
And the final act of this suppression involved the documents themselves. The U.S. wasn't just after Kammler. They were after the blueprints.
New evidence suggests the U.S. mounted a serious and illegal incursion into Czechoslovakia, breaking international law. Why?
Solely to seize a massive hoard of microfilm documents near Prague. And these documents are believed to be the entire records of the Kammler Group, the definitive blueprint for the technological future.
So this was a deliberate effort to ensure this advanced science remained secret, especially from the other allies like the Soviets and the British.
This strategy, capturing the entire knowledge base to maintain a technological monopoly, is what researchers have dubbed the Vesco principle.
The theft of the blueprint for the technological future of the 20th century was apparently complete, hidden away behind a frozen gate.
The U.S. knew exactly what was being hidden and went to extraordinary lengths to secure it.
And this leads to the ultimate paradox, the reason why we are only now hearing these stories 80 years later, the silence maintained by the victors.
That is the Vesco principle in action.
That's it. This principle explains the post-war silence. If only one allied power, the U.S., which secured Kammler's cache, or the Soviets, who captured other key personnel, gained a specific breakthrough German technology, they kept it absolutely secret from their former allies.
It was a race for German secrets that continued long after the shooting stopped.
The implication being that the entire framework of post-war science, the rockets, the nuclear programs, the Cold War arms race, is merely a carefully curated, strategically delayed, and sanitized version of what existed, fully developed, in the SS bureaus at the end of World War II.
The Black Sun paradox suggests that the war ended not with the defeat of a nation, but with the massive transfer and subsequent suppression of technologies that were decades ahead of schedule.
From zero-point energy to ICBMs and tactical nukes, all orchestrated from within secret SS bureaus.
We started this with the analogy of a secret folder in an old manuscript. What we've detailed today is a history where the entire operating system of global science was secretly replaced in 1945 without ever running a public update.
The history we were taught became the perfect concealment mechanism. It's an unbelievable, thrilling, and, if true, a transformative narrative.
And that leads to the final provocative thought we want to leave with you.
Yeah.
If the Allies knew in 1944 about technologies that allowed for zero-point energy propulsion, gravity manipulation, and operational orbital bases, what technologies are currently being developed right now, hidden deep underground, shielded by black budgets, that will define the shape of the world another 80 years from now.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.